Under the sharp tropical sun of Caracas, the red banners of Venezuela's Socialist Party hang from the walls of the La Carlota air base. Rows of journalists set up their cameras as the weekly press conference begins. At the center of the hall, Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello sits flanked by senior members of the ruling Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, the PSUV. His expression is steady, his tone deliberate. This is no routine briefing. It is a calculated message to both domestic audiences and neighboring governments. Cabello begins by addressing what he calls an orchestrated campaign to provoke conflict between Venezuela and its island neighbor, Trinidad and Tobago. He claims the government has uncovered evidence of a false flag operation, a staged incident allegedly involving CIA operatives, meant to make it appear that Venezuela had attacked a vessel belonging either to the United States or to Trinidad and Tobago. The goal, he says, was simple: to trigger confrontation, to frame Venezuela as an aggressor, and to justify further US military activity in the Caribbean. In his words, it was even denounced by our foreign minister that a false flag operation was orchestrated involving CIA agents, some of whom were captured, to make it appear that Venezuela had attacked a vessel belonging to the United States or Trinidad and Tobago in order to provoke a conflict. The claim, though unverified by independent observers, instantly rippled through regional media. Venezuelan state broadcasters repeated the statement throughout the day, while government social media channels amplified images from the press room, a gesture of defiance designed to reinforce Caracas's narrative that the country is under external threat. Behind Cabello, the PSUV logo glows in crimson red, a visual reminder of the party's revolutionary identity and its enduring loyalty to the legacy of Hugo Chavez. At his side sit Eduardo Piñate, the Minister of Labour, and Pedro Infante, the first Vice President of Parliament. Together, they nod as Cabello continues his accusations, painting a portrait of betrayal by a neighbour once seen as a friend. Cabello turns his focus squarely toward the leadership in Port of Spain. His tone hardens as he declares, "Sadly, for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidadian government has taken a stance against our country." Historically, Trinidad and Tobago has had good relations with Venezuela, extraordinary relations. The remark references decades of bilateral cooperation. Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela share maritime borders, energy ties, and cultural exchanges that stretch back generations. Thousands of Venezuelan migrants have sought refuge on the island since the country's economic collapse began in 2014. For Caracas, this long-standing relationship has often been both a diplomatic bridge and a safety valve. But today, Cabello's words mark a public rupture, a declaration that those ties have been politically compromised. He goes further, naming Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar directly. In his third statement, he alleges that the Trinidadian leader has personally attacked Venezuela verbally and physically, suggesting that she has ignored years of goodwill. His voice carries an edge of accusation. We have been attacked by Trinidad and Tobago, both verbally and physically, by the lady who is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who has not cared about the good relations we have enjoyed for so long. All of this has to do with who can be blackmailed and who cannot. The implication is striking. Cabello is not only suggesting foreign interference, but also claiming that Trinidad's political leadership is susceptible to US pressure, that Persad-Bissessar's actions are not of her own making, but rather the consequence of external leverage. Throughout the hall, journalists exchange glances. In Venezuela, such accusations are not uncommon, yet the timing of this one, just days after a US Navy destroyer conducted joint military exercises with Trinidad and Tobago's Coast Guard, makes it politically charged. The exercises, centered on maritime patrol and search and rescue coordination, were conducted aboard the USS Gravely, a guided missile destroyer assigned to US Southern Command. The Pentagon described the mission as a routine engagement to strengthen regional security cooperation, but in Caracas it is being framed as a direct provocation, a deliberate act near Venezuelan waters. Cabello seizes on this imagery, blending military symbolism with nationalist rhetoric. He describes the visit of the USS Gravely as part of a larger pattern, what he calls the United States using smaller nations to pressure and isolate Venezuela. The underlying message to his domestic audience is one of vigilance and resistance. that Venezuela's sovereignty is under assault, not through open war but through proxy maneuvers. In his final soundbite, Cabello delivers a personal rebuke aimed at the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. "We are not blackmailable by anyone. We have nothing to hide. When a leader like the President of Trinidad and Tobago allows herself to be blackmailed, it's because she has something to hide. Ask who is being held in the United States close to her and what they are accused of." The words "nothing to hide," no tenemos rabo de paja, as he says in Spanish, carry cultural weight. The Venezuelan idiom literally means "we have no straw tail," a phrase rooted in local folklore suggesting that those who do are easily burned. It is Cabello's way of asserting moral superiority. Venezuela, he insists, stands blameless while others yield to pressure. The press room buzzes with restrained tension. Cameras pan across rows of government officials taking notes as the minister speaks. On Venezuelan state television, anchors later repeat the phrase, "No somos chantageables," we are not blackmailable, as the quote of the day. It becomes the core of the government's narrative for that week, a defiant stance against both Washington and its regional allies. Outside the conference hall, Caracas hums with the ordinary rhythm of a Monday afternoon. Street vendors sell coffee from dented thermoses, and traffic along Avenida Francisco de Miranda crawls beneath billboards bearing the president's face. Yet beneath the surface, the sense of isolation deepens. Economic sanctions remain in place, oil production struggles to recover, and migration continues unabated. The government's political survival depends as much on external enemies as on internal loyalty. Analysts in Latin America note that Cabello's statements serve multiple purposes. Domestically, they rally the party base around a familiar theme, resistance against imperial aggression. Regionally, they challenge smaller Caribbean states to pick sides, framing neutrality as complicity. And internationally, they inject doubt into US narratives about stability and democracy in the hemisphere. For Trinidad and Tobago, the accusations place it in an awkward diplomatic position. The island nation has traditionally balanced relations between Washington and Caracas, maintaining energy and security cooperation with both. But the optics of hosting a US warship, particularly one engaged in exercises within sight of Venezuelan waters, were always bound to draw attention. Officials in Port of Spain have yet to issue a full rebuttal, though government spokespeople privately emphasized that the exercises were scheduled months in advance and focused purely on maritime disaster preparedness. Within Venezuela, however, the narrative is already fixed. The government's media apparatus frames the incident as another example of what it calls the new colonialism of the Caribbean, a regional security network led by the United States, designed to contain socialist governments and enforce compliance through naval diplomacy. Commentators on state-run VTV link the USS Gravely visit to the broader US strategy in Latin America, citing recent cooperation with Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and Guyana as evidence of encirclement. Cabello's remarks, therefore, resonate not only as political theatre, but as part of a broader ideological confrontation, one in which Venezuela positions itself as the last bulwark against foreign domination in the Caribbean basin. His references to blackmail and hidden hands reinforce a narrative of betrayal, turning diplomatic gestures by neighbouring states into moral tests of sovereignty. As the press conference concludes, party members rise and applaud. The camera lingers on Cabello's raised hand, a salute to the red-shirted audience before him. For the faithful, it is a gesture of strength. For critics, it is the familiar choreography of a government facing growing internal strain. Yet the tone of defiance remains unmistakable. Venezuela, Cabello implies, will neither apologise nor retreat. Later that evening, opposition outlets publish rebuttals. Independent journalists point out the absence of verifiable evidence regarding captured CIA agents. International wire agencies report the allegations but note that no corroborating details have been provided. The US Embassy in Caracas dismisses the claims as disinformation. Meanwhile, the Trinidadian press urges calm, warning against escalation and calling for diplomatic restraint. In Washington, a State Department spokesperson reaffirms the right of regional partners to conduct joint exercises. Our cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago is transparent and focused on maritime safety, the statement reads. But even this tempered language does little to cool tempers in Caracas. For Venezuelan officials, each US military movement near their coastlines is seen through the lens of encirclement, a Cold War reflex in a 21st century context. By the next morning, headlines across Venezuelan state media repeat the same message. Trinidad takes a stance against Venezuela. The phrasing mirrors Cabello's words exactly, emphasizing betrayal not as an isolated incident, but as a shift in the regional balance. Editorials describe the situation as a test of Caribbean loyalty, asking which nations will submit to Washington's pressure and which will defend the dignity of independence. Behind the political spectacle lies a deeper strategic anxiety. The Caribbean has become an increasingly contested space, not only between the United States and Venezuela, but also among external powers seeking influence in the region. China and Russia maintain limited but symbolic footholds, supporting Venezuelan infrastructure and defense programs. The United States, for its part, has re-energized its partnerships with Caribbean democracies through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. For Trinidad and Tobago, participation in US exercises signals alignment with Western defense frameworks. For Caracas, it signals hostility. In this broader context, Cabello's rhetoric functions as both warning and prophecy. It warns neighboring governments that cooperation with Washington comes at the price of confrontation with Caracas, and it prophesies that Venezuela's enemies, external or internal, will ultimately be exposed. His repeated insistence that Venezuela has nothing to hide is as much a defense against corruption allegations at home as it is a jab at the foreign governments he accuses of hypocrisy. Throughout the 32-minute briefing, the minister alternates between fiery conviction and measured composure. His delivery evokes the style of Chavez himself, populist, assertive, and theatrical. For supporters, it is reassurance that the revolution's guardians remain vigilant. For detractors, it is yet another distraction from the country's deepening economic and humanitarian crises. As the day ends, the lights of Caracas shimmer across the valley, their glow faint against the mountains. In homes with intermittent electricity, families tune into evening broadcasts replaying Cabello's remarks. The message is clear. Venezuela stands encircled but unbowed, betrayed but defiant. The image of the USS Gravely, sleek, foreign, symbolic, becomes a shorthand for intrusion, and the small island of Trinidad and Tobago, once a partner in trade and migration, now occupies the uncomfortable role of the neighbor accused. For international observers, the episode highlights the fragility of Caribbean diplomacy in an age of shifting allegiances. It shows how quickly cooperation can be reframed as provocation and how national pride can be weaponized in moments of political strain. Whether Cabello's allegations hold truth or serve as calculated theater, their effect is undeniable. They deepen Venezuela's isolation while reinforcing its narrative of endurance against foreign plots. In the closing images of the press event, the PSUV emblem flickers on a giant screen, a red star encircled by the slogan, "Leales siempre, traidores nunca," always loyal, never traitors. The applause fades, but the message lingers, echoing across Venezuela's airwaves long after the cameras stop rolling.